MP's expenses and indeed everything else. It is a pretty gobsmacking development. But today the government decided to save one of its MPs from punishment by dismantling the system designed to prevent corruption.
The issue in this case is whether a member of this House had a fair opportunity to make representations in this case.
If the public believe that we are marking our own homework, our reputation individually and collectively will be tarnished.
The Prime Minister said this was about natural justice, but many Tory MPs acknowledged the blindingly obvious. The optics were not good. Also on News at 10 tonight. Desperate to go home, Paul has another exclusive report on the dire nature of the capacity crisis in our care system. The race row that is tarnishing the name of Yorkshire Cricket. Is this part of the answer, the renewable energy coming to Britain via underwater cable all the way from Morocco? Joe Biden loses his bounce. The Republicans look to be back in business in the US.
For Republicans like these, this result is a political adrenaline shot, making them feel they can win control of the Senate next year and the White House in 2024.
And Stella McCartney on the eco questions the fashion world has to answer and the true cost of a £2 top.
You can't make stuff that cheap and have any good come of it.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. It might be easiest to begin tonight with a question. Do you think it's okay for your MP to be paid by a company to lobby the government? I'm guessing the answer is probably a resounding no. But what about if he or she was paid for advice, for his experience in business and, yes, perhaps of government too? Well, I'm guessing most would consider that a grey area at best. And for that reason, we have a commissioner to investigate and determine what is really not okay. She ruled very clearly against the former Tory minister Owen Paterson, who was paid £100,000 a year to work for two companies and was accused of abusing his position to lobby for them. He says he was raising safety concerns and has never had a fair hearing. Today, Boris Johnson decided to back him to the hilt, throwing out the whole system as a result. And to say that was controversial would be a bit of an understatement.
It is a corrupt practice.
The worst excesses of 1990s Tory sleaze.
It's not about letting anyone off.
Feelings were running high, not surprisingly. They were meant to be voting on suspending a former minister. Instead, the government had backed an amendment to rerun the investigation.
The ayes to the right, 250. The noes to the left, 232.
Shame. Cries of shame echoed round the chamber as the result was announced. Parliament had just voted to ignore the Committee on Standards verdict that Owen Paterson had breached lobbying rules. Earlier, Labour's deputy leader went on the attack.
In no other profession in our country could someone be found guilty by an independent process and just have their mates vote them back into the job.
The issue in this case is whether a member of this House had a fair opportunity to make representations in this case, or whether as a matter of natural justice, our procedures in this House allow for proper appeal, Mr. Speaker.
Last week's report into Mr. Paterson's conduct was categorical, that he had broken the rules. The committee found that Mr. Paterson's actions were an egregious case of paid advocacy, that he repeatedly used his privileged position to benefit two companies for whom he was a paid consultant, and that this has brought the House into disrepute. He maintains the process wasn't fair, but the chair of the committee said it was wrong to change the system now.
If the public believe that we are marking our own homework, our reputation individually and collectively will be tarnished.
Some Tory MPs agreed.
That reform can only work if it's across the House, and by bringing her amendment today, it looks like we're moving the goalposts, and for that reason I can't support her.
But what about Mr. Paterson?
Some people would say that the better way to behave would be to accept the punishment, the 30-day suspension, and then
get MPs to look at the system again?
Well, that was the government's decision to go ahead this way. I mean, they were quite right when they looked at my case to see just how bad it was. I mean, I have brought serious wrongs to the attention of government agencies.
You're not at all worried about how it will look to the general public, that you change the rules retrospectively?
Well, if it's portrayed as that, that's the parody, that will look bad. But that is not actually what's happened. What's happened is we have a chance to build a new system where evidence is exchanged, where witnesses are properly interrogated.
In his North Shropshire constituency, not many were convinced he deserved a second chance.
They're all very much in a club, aren't they? And I think we've lost... I think we've all lost a bit of trust in them, really. If they're tempted enough, if the carrot is dangled, then I think they would be tempted.
You can get blamed for something. You're trying to do the best, and you may not necessarily do it in the best way.
Whatever people outside Parliament may think, a new committee of MPs will now hear the case again. Libby Vina, News at 10, Westminster.
Well, it is a Wednesday night, so as you would expect, Robert is recording his Peston programme, always worth watching. Doubly so, I would have thought, tonight. He's in Glasgow, as you can probably see. Robert, look, I don't know, you and I have been covering politics a very long time, you know, way back, cash for questions, MPs' expenses. It's been one issue after another. What's your assessment of the overall impact of today in particular?
Well, I think it's going to be very serious for the government. I mean, the reason you're talking to me in Glasgow, because obviously I'm covering the climate change conference. Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, is up here, and I've just actually interviewed him on my for my show, and he said to me that the reason that Boris Johnson instructed Tory MPs to vote against these immediate sanctions against Owen Paterson was because the system of judging whether MPs have committed an act of what used to be called sleaze doesn't allow for a proper appeal. But so I said to him, well, why on earth, therefore, since this system has been in place for years, didn't you try to amend it before one of your close colleagues got punished? And he didn't really have an answer. And that is the problem for the Prime Minister, that, the committee, as you know, that investigated this, and the Commissioner said no previous case of paid advocacy has seen so many breaches or such a clear pattern of confusion between private and public interest. It looks to most people like an open and shut case. The Prime Minister is, trying to drive a coach and horses through it. The opposition is saying that they're not going to cooperate with the reform. So we're going to end up with no credible system. As I say, I think the Prime Minister may have made a serious misjudgment today.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed, and definitely do. Stay tuned for Robert's programme coming up after the news. Now, throughout the pandemic, care workers have managed to keep going, helping and looking after the people who rely on them. But we have discovered that the number of those people waiting for care, whether home visits or places in local authority homes, has nearly doubled in a year because of staff shortages.
In room 20, 88-year-old Myra Hall has made herself a home, but it is not her own. 2 doors down, 72-year-old Florence Louth is also living at Knoll Manor in Morley, but she too shouldn't be here. Both women have had to stay in the care home for weeks after leaving hospital because there aren't any carers in the community to help them get back to their own houses.
Do you think you need to be in a care home?
Along the Belarusian border?
No, I don't. I can manage everything, I'm about older than some years left. Want to make the best of them, don't I?
I miss seeing my kids, my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, and going out and enjoying myself with my family.
Around 1/5 of these rooms are occupied by people who don't need to be here, housed in a care home, because like thousands of others, they can't get care in their own home.
For the first time, ITV News can quantify the crisis in care. A snapshot from 87 councils across the UK shows that on a single day last September, just over 5,000 people were waiting for care. But by this September, that had nearly doubled to almost 10,000 people. In Dundee, the waiting list has grown 7-fold in 2 years. In Salford, it's almost 15 times longer, and in Cheshire East, almost 25 times longer. Where Myra and Florence live in Leeds, waiting lists are up 4-fold.
We've never known it like this before. It is unprecedented. And it's the result of COVID. It's the result of 10 years of cuts to local government funding. It's the fact that we cannot compete on wages with retail and hospitality.
You want to fix it and you can't fix it.
From sobbing staff to anger and exhaustion.
I don't want to do all these hours. I want a life.
ITV News has been reporting for months on the staffing crisis in care, caused mostly by poor pay, though not according to the Care Minister.
First of all, they need recognition and value. That's the most important thing for anybody.
More important than their pay?
I think it is, actually, if you look at all the evidence. The most important thing for anybody in any workplace is for actually feeling valued and feeling recognised for what you do.
The government has promised billions in investment for care, but the sector says it's only enough to stand still, and thousands will remain stuck like Myra and Florence for as long as carers are left worrying about putting food on their own tables. Paul Brand, News at 10, Leeds.
Yorkshire Cricket was already on a very sticky wicket over how it has handled the findings of a report which found one of its former bowlers, Azeem Rafiq, had been racially abused. Banter, they'd called it. Well, today, after the club's failure to act, big sponsors have begun to pull out, Yorkshire Tea and Anchor Butter among them. Politicians have written to the Board of English Cricket, and now Rafiq's former Yorkshire teammate, Gary Balance, has admitted using racial slurs against the man he describes as his best mate in cricket.
He was the first of Pakistani heritage to captain Yorkshire's cricket team, but Azeem Rafiq cut his career short, driven to tears and thoughts of suicide, he says, from racial abuse he suffered while playing at the club. His treatment there has been investigated, but comments from the panel looking into it were leaked, reportedly saying a racially offensive term used to describe Azeem was simply banter, something that sparked outrage across many within the sport.
I mean, a lot of the players love the sort of brotherhood, camaraderie, but, you know, players need to have an understanding of what is termed as racist and what is termed as banter.
It's this suggestion that a racial slur could be dismissed in such a way that caused this furious response from the Health Secretary Sajid Javid. "This is not banter," he tweeted. "Heads should roll at Yorkshire County Cricket Club. If the England and Wales Cricket Board doesn't take action, it's not fit for purpose." A cross-party group of MPs have called for urgent action too, calling for the board of the Yorkshire County Cricket Club to resign.
So I'd like to see why it is that anyone who has either covered up or excused this use of this revolting word, whether or not they should remain in post at the club.
This has already had a huge impact to the club's reputation, but also its finances too. One of its biggest sponsors, Emerald, whose name adorns their stadium, says they don't want to be associated with the club anymore, and they're not the only ones. Tetley say they won't be renewing their contract, and also Yorkshire Tea are pulling out too. The club's sponsors making their stance against racism, something England's cricketers have shown at the T20 World Cup too. Solidarity that discrimination won't be tolerated, making Azeem's experience even harder for many to believe.
Such a deaf ear to the complaints, not only from one of its former players, but also to the game and society at large. You're basically giving yourself a problem, more of a case to answer.
Gary Balance has tonight admitted using the racial slur and has apologised to his former teammate. But for Yorkshire County Cricket Club and Azeem, it may all have come too late. Sangeeta Lal, News at 10, Leeds.
Now, in the first couple of days of the Climate Change Summit in Glasgow, they've discussed the scale of the problem and then some of the solutions. Today, it was the turn of business and indeed finance to show what they could do. First, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, called on big British companies to lead the way by showing their workings on how they'll decarbonise. He then announced that global banks, pension funds and insurance companies with $130 trillion at their disposal would make combating climate change their number one investment priority.
Holding up the streets of Glasgow,
Protesters who believe plans for a net zero economy are simply a smokescreen for banks and big business still making money out of fossil fuels. The Chancellor arrived to say he's stamping greenwashing out, although something alarmingly similar seemed to have befallen his red budget box. But he's adamant the world's wealth will be redirected to help combat the climate crisis.
I know when people hear about global finance, it can often feel remote and abstract. But we're not simply talking about numbers on a page. We're talking about making a tangible difference to people's lives.
And small gestures, like the charging points RBS has installed at its Edinburgh HQ, won't be enough. Instead, the UK's biggest firms will be expected to publish exactly how they intend to hit their climate change targets, with plans for an expert panel to scrutinise them. The country's most senior banker approves.
What you get then is a discipline from transparency, a discipline from, frankly, you and all the rest of us actually holding people to account and saying, are you actually doing what you said you would do?
Meanwhile, hundreds of the globe's biggest companies have been corralled by his predecessor into moving some of their vast wealth towards green technology.
Do you genuinely believe we're going to see the big asset managers, the big financial institutions stop investing in fossil fuels?
I genuinely believe, and what they have committed, over 450 around the world, $130 trillion. What they're committed to is financing the transition, and that's what people want, and putting capital to get the emissions down.
The 450 banks and financial institutions which have signed the net zero agreement control 40% of the world's wealth. In the 5 years since the Paris Agreement, some of those big banks have invested billions financing fossil fuels. JP Morgan led the way with $317 billion in just 4 years. Citi has put in $238 billion, with the Bank of America placing $200 billion of its investors' money into carbon-based industries.
Innumerable acronyms, pages of pledges. Is there one single thing in all of this which will stop any financial institution investing in oil or gas?
No, there is not a single rule which is actually speaking about stopping financing fossil fuels.
But others are much more optimistic.
I have been to many of these COPs. It is the first time there are specific institutional steps that are being taken to move big money where it should go.
Outside the venue, the protests continued. The challenge now is to ensure the pledges made inside it are policed with similar vigour. Rachel Younger, News at 10, Glasgow.
When the conference hears about financing the green economy, what kind of things do they mean? Well, how about this? A 2,500-mile undersea cable between the UK and the rather sunnier climes of Morocco. The company behind the plan says it will import solar and wind power. The cable will come ashore at the British end in a small Devon village. Alva Discott.
Morocco is blessed with epic mountain ranges and ancient cities, but also a wealth of natural resources. 2,500 hours of sunlight bake the Saharan sands every year, and every day the wind blows. A British company now wants to build a solar wind farm here to harness that power for use in the UK.
You can generate 3 times more energy per square metre in Morocco than you could ever do in the UK.
Sir Dave Lewis is the former chief executive of Tesco. He chairs the X-Links project and thinks such innovation warrants more investment.
Whilst we can and we should go faster in the removal of emissions from fossil fuels, progress has been made. The technology exists to replace that with renewable energy, but we need to invest and probably invest quicker. The idea that we can lower the price of electricity in a renewable, sustainable way, we've absolutely got to be doing that.
Solar panels would generate the power in Morocco. It would then travel via 4 high-tech cables underwater, passing Spain, Portugal and France, reaching the national grid in Devon to provide 8% of the UK's energy. That's 7 million homes.
Wow.
And Morocco has been a forerunner in renewable technologies for the last decade, trialling the engineering for itself first, creating the largest solar power plant of its kind.
Morocco has very small oil and gas reserves. Most of its energy comes from imported fossil fuels. So this plant was built to help the country harness its own energy on a very grand and ambitious scale.
But in a country of 35 million people, only 2 million currently gain from it. Yet selling its energy abroad is still part of their government strategy.
The development of these mega projects is to give us autonomy over our own energy nationally first, but also use our resources to send to other countries for us to profit economically too.
Renewable energy sources here are consistent and reliable, and capturing and connecting it to the UK could happen by the end of the decade. The power of nature benefiting us all. Lucy Watson, News at 10.
It's quite some story, really, isn't it? Now, cast your mind back exactly 1 year. Americans were voting to replace Donald Trump with Joe Biden as their president. Only a year ago, you say. Yes, indeed. Well, Mr. Trump has always said he wanted another crack at the White House, and that looks a bit more likely after a fellow Republican won the governorship of Virginia overnight. It is only one vote, of course, but the result was unexpected, and it was President Biden's first big electoral test in 12 months. Analysts and other Republicans say it shows frustration with Mr. Biden and the economy.
It is Republicans who are today ebullient.
All righty, Virginia, we won this thing!
Yes, this victory was the election of a governor in a single state. But across the country, the mood is shifting. And last night was evidence that Democrats are in deepening political peril. In office for less than 300 days, and Joe Biden, who returned overnight from Scotland, is facing plunging approval ratings and a broad sense among key voting groups that his administration is adrift. The criticism from Republicans as they gathered in small-town America to watch the results come in is bitter and often deeply personal.
I would say wake up, Joe. I mean, he's asleep half the time. I don't think that he's in control of what's going on. I'm honestly not sure that he even understands what's being done in the name of his administration.
But what does this say about Joe Biden and the Democrats to you?
To me personally, it says that people recognize they were sold a pig in a poke. He is basically not at home.
For Republicans like these, this result is a political adrenaline shot, making them feel they can win control of the Senate next year and the White House in 2024. And recognize this dance? Yes, re-emerging like a phoenix into this new political landscape is Donald Trump, who has been claiming credit for last night's results in Virginia. In recent weeks, he's held rallies and, using his trademark tactics, has suggested America is facing the apocalypse.
After just 9 months under Biden, violent criminals and bloodthirsty gangs are taking over our streets. Illegal aliens and deadly drug cartels are taking over our borders.
And his army of supporters are still here, waiting for this moment.
We love Trump. Trump's a man that's an honorable man. He's an honest man, and he's got grit, and people, we respect that. So
do you want him to run undoubtedly in 2024?
Donald Trump's still my president right now, sir. Yes, I want him to run, but he's still my president right now.
President Biden had every reason to feel weary as he headed into the residence last night. For what lies ahead is trench warfare with a newly energized Republican Party. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
The year-long war in Ethiopia looks to be heading for a bloody conclusion in and around the capital, Addis Ababa. Forces from the northern region of Tigray, who have long wanted independence, are approaching the city. The country's prime minister has told anyone there with a gun to get them ready and prepare to defend their city against the troops, as we'll hear, who have carried out atrocities as they fought their way south.
A war prosecuted with such burning hatred that it threatens to tear apart one of Africa's success stories. And it seems the rebels are winning. Victorious scenes broadcast on Tigrayan television. They claim to be moving on the capital, where Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, one-time Nobel Peace Prize recipient, has mobilized civilians and warned of enemies determined to destroy the nation.
City Hall in Addis Ababa said Ethiopians need to register their weapons and defend their interests, their neighborhoods.
Can the government of Prime Minister Abiy survive?
So the simple answer I have for you is I really don't know.
This is a war stained by crimes against humanity, atrocities on all sides.
Civilians in Tigray have been subjected to brutal violence and suffering.
Confirmed in horrific detail by UN and Ethiopian investigators.
The 26-year-old woman in Adyet who was gang raped by Eritrean Defense Force soldiers in front of her 3-year-old daughter. The man in Maikadra attacked with machetes by the Samri Tigrayan youth group, shot in the back and thrown into a fire.
The government's hastily conscripted soldiers, unpaid and undertrained, are retreating. But its blockade of Tigray has left 5 million people in urgent need of food. What the UN calls a senseless war is escalating. There will be more bloodshed before there is peace. John Ray, News at 10.
Significant change in subject now, and the contradiction of modern fashion. Staying on trend without buying lots of environmentally unfriendly new clothes is a difficult one for the industry and shoppers alike. So back at the COP26 summit, the designer Stella McCartney has been explaining the route ahead for fashion to Prince Charles. Yes, recycling is part of it, but then so too are new ideas like making handbags out of mushroom roots.
These are my vegan bags and shoes. This is the future of fashion.
Prince Charles may not know too much about these handbags, but he does know rather a lot about the damaging impact of fashion. Stella McCartney's label is hardly high street, but she is highly passionate about what her industry is doing to the planet.
Not everyone can afford the kind of clothes that you sell. So what is the solution?
Well, the solution is a different mindset, you know, second-hand clothing, vintage clothing, renting clothing, swapping clubs with your communities and your friends, charity shops.
So kind of less going down the high street and buying things cheaply and quickly and throwing them away.
I mean, that'll be the death of us, you know. I don't think people understand you can't buy something for £2 that's been made, manufactured, the fabric, the sold gets to you. You can't make stuff that cheap and have any good come of it.
Fast fashion is responsible for huge piles of discarded clothes like this one we previously filmed at in Ghana. It grows by 50 tonnes per day. And while COP26 has been heavily focused on issues like burning less coal, the clothes we all wear account for 10% of global carbon emissions.
How on earth is the fashion industry getting away with chopping down 150 million trees a year for some fabric?
Fashion can be done differently, she insists. Her new handbags, for example, made from mycelium, basically threads of mushroom roots. Not high street yet, perhaps, but the big brand, she argues, must change.
You've previously worked with some of the fast fashion brands. Can those sort of high street brands be doing more?
God, it was like 20 years ago. I was the first one to do it, and I insisted that it was all organic, it was all sustainable, which at that time, I mean, you know, I was ridiculed and I was like a freak. And at that time, we hadn't the knowledge that we had today.
Today, her designer brand caught the attention of Leonardo DiCaprio as well as Prince Charles. But her cause needs to catch the attention of millions of shoppers for the sake of the planet. Chris Ship, News at 10 at COP26.
Some football, and Liverpool might not be top of the Premier League right now, but they are the first English club through to the last 16 of the Champions League. They beat Atletico Madrid 2-0 at home with goals from Diogo Jota and this one from Sadio Mane. It was a night on which everything went their way, including VAR ruling out a Madrid goal, and Manchester City beat Club Brugge 4-1. Finally, a happy postscript to the news from Western Australia that we reported last night, the discovery of the missing 4-year-old Cleo Smith. She disappeared, you'll recall, from her tent during a family camping holiday nearly 3 weeks ago. Well, she was found in a house back in her hometown of Carnarvon, 50 miles away. Here she is, carried out by police, including Detective Cameron Blaine.
And that was it from Glasgow for tonight. It's quiet here now.
She was checked over in hospital, reunited with her mum and stepdad, and given a great big ice lolly. And there you are, evidence miracles do happen. Good night. Thanks for watching.